What if I told you there was this 6'5", 220-pound white heavyweight knocking out 90% of his opponents in his victories, 70 of 78 to be exact? You'd be thinking to yourself, I know that guy. It's not Tyson Fury, it's not Gary Cooney. You have to go back, way back. Fred Tobias Fulton was born on April 19, 1891 in Blue Rapids, Kansas. Fulton had an 84.5-inch reach to match his 6'5" frame, and though he could weigh upwards of 220 plus pounds, he generally came in around 212. He picked up nicknames such as the Minnesota Plasterer and the Rochester Plasterer, alluding to his trade, which has nothing to do with Kansas, but we'll discuss why later. Fulton came to in the era of the Great White Hopes. If you've had any sports history connection, particularly boxing, you've heard this term before. And yes, there was a movie of the same title. The term White Hope derived from repeated appeals by writer Jack London, then a reporter for the New York Herald, for a White Hope to take the world heavyweight title from the Galveston giant Jack Johnson, who on December 26, 1908, defeated the Little Giant of Hanover, Tommy Burns, to become the first black world heavyweight champion. From that point forward, there was a mass search for a white fighter to dethrone Johnson and reclaim the world heavyweight title for the white race. Stick around to see how Fulton fared. Also, like and subscribe. Wrestling during the time of Fulton was the most popular sport in Minnesota, and Fulton's size and strength gained him traction in said sport. With the attention, this soon turned him to working on his boxing at the police gymnasium after sports writer Frank Force noticed and eventually became Fulton's manager. What Fulton lacked in pugilistic skill, he more than made up for with his size and power punch. Fred Fulton made his professional debut on New Year's Day 1913. At the time, boxing wasn't legal in the state of Minnesota, where he had resided since 1907 when he was around 16 years old, and moved to Rochester to be exact. Fulton came to Rochester as a young man and worked as a plasterer, hence the nickname. Ironically, it would be fitting in his boxing trade as he's undoubtedly one of the biggest punchers the sport has seen. Fulton got started in boxing, sparring in local boxing matches at Rochester's Metropolitan Theater. His first 5 fights would take place in Hudson, Wisconsin, which wasn't far from Rochester and where many residing Minnesotans would frequent to fight professionally. Prize fighting had been banned in Minnesota since 1892. Fred Fulton seemed to have the type of power that makes one stand out in the sport. Given such, he would soon start to gain attention and buzz around the area. Fulton would knock out 5 of his 7 opponents in 1913, and the future looked bright. In the midst of this, he was able to fight an exhibition with Hall of Famer Billy MISKE, the St. Paul Thunderbolt, a former world heavyweight title challenger also from Minnesota. One of Fulton's early rivals was Carl Morris, a 6'4" heavyweight contender from the era. Morris would hand Fulton the first blemish on his record when on April 3, 1913 in Hudson, then 9-0 Fulton would suffer a 6-round disqualification loss. He'd follow this up with another DQ loss before being knocked out by Al Palzer in the 4th round on May 22nd. Fulton and Morris would meet again on October 9th in Hudson, with Morris knocking out Fulton in the 6th of a scheduled 10 rounds. This did damage to Fulton's reputation, though he and his team didn't waver and kept Fulton in the ring, taking fights outside of the Hudson area. By 1915, it was evident that a change was needed. Fulton and Force amicably parted ways, and Fulton took on Mike Collins as his new manager. From there, a big push was made to get Fulton the notoriety he deserved, and Collins had the right experience as a publicist to make it happen. Fulton would knock out his next 5 opponents, which included a June 4th knockout win over Frank Farmer, a former Pacific Coast heavyweight and light heavyweight champion who had wins over the likes of Jack Dillon and Gumbo Smith in his career. He would finish 1915 10-0 with 9 knockouts. Meanwhile, the call for a white hope to defeat Jack Johnson was answered when on April 5, 1915, former circus hand-turned boxer, the Potawatomi giant Jess Willard, knocked out Jack Johnson in Havana, Cuba to become the new world heavyweight champion. A few weeks later, on April 24th, a bill to legalize prize fighting passed legislation in Minnesota. It was said that the success of Mike and Tommy Gibbons, Mike O'Dowd, and Billy MISKE, all successful world-level Minnesotan boxers, played a role in the backing. On May 14, 1915, Jess Willard came to Rochester, Minnesota as a part of a Wild West traveling circus show. The show advertised that in a solo session, Willard would demonstrate the blows he used to defeat Jack Johnson to win the world heavyweight title. Fulton's manager, Mike Collins, arranged for an exhibition between Willard and Fulton. During the exhibition, Fulton decked Willard, sending him to the canvas. This is a story he would recall with pride for the remainder of his life. By the end of 1915, Mike Collins had arranged a matchup between Fred Fulton and world heavyweight champion Jess Willard in New Orleans, Louisiana in March of 1916. Fulton also signed onto a 10-week vaudeville tour, which saw him perform triumphantly at the Rochester Metropolitan Theater that December. To the dismay of Fulton and his team, the New Orleans promoters pulled out of the deal with Fulton versus Willard and replaced Fulton with Frank Moran, as they didn't view Fulton as a big enough name. Undeterred, in 1916, Fulton's competition rose, and his ability to answer the call is what put him in discussion as one of the best heavyweights in the world. This started with his January 28th matchup with PORKY Dan Flynn in New Orleans, Louisiana. The 20-round points victory was given to Fred Fulton by referee Tommy Burns. Fulton would follow this up with a March 17 contest with the battle-tested fireman Jim Flynn in Milwaukee. Flynn dominated the first round, showing his force. At the start of the second, Fulton leaped from his stool and slung a long right that landed squarely on the chin of fireman Flynn, sending him to the canvas and out cold for 3 minutes. When revived, Flynn was sat on his stool where he popped up, thinking the fight was still going, swinging at an imaginary foe 5 minutes after the fight had already ended. On April 28th, Fulton would knock out former amateur boxing champion Al Reich in the ninth of a scheduled 10 rounds in New York. On September 8th, Fulton would rematch PORKY Dan Flynn, this time in St. Paul. Less than a minute into the first, Fulton sent Flynn flying to the canvas with a hard shot. Fulton led in all but the third and fifth rounds as he routinely had Flynn in distress. The latter portion of the fight was marred by clinching from Flynn, and in the end, Fulton won the 10-round newspaper decision. Fulton would continue to impress as he needed only 1 round to knock out English fighter Tom COWLER on January 9, 1917. COWLER was floored with a left hook only to rise and be floored again for good. Fulton came in at 222.5 pounds and pummeled the 183-pound CHARLEY WEINERT on February 12th, knocking him out in 2 rounds. On April 4th, Fulton would lose a controversial 5th-round disqualification loss to rival Carl Morris in New York. Fulton was considered to be the superior fighter, and the foul was reported to have looked deliberate. A reported contest with world heavyweight champion Jess Willard was on the line. On June 19th, Fred Fulton would get an opportunity in the ring against one of, if not the greatest fighter of all time, the Boston BONECRUSHER Sam Langford, in a 12-rounder in Boston, Massachusetts. Langford was reported to have come into the contest in no shape to fight and was dropped in the first and second rounds. From there, Fulton essentially was in cruise control as he gave Langford a shellacking. Langford retired on his stool at the start of the 7th round, handing Fulton the victory. Langford's eyes were closed, and it's been long reported that it was this fight with Fulton that left Langford blind in his left eye for the remainder of his career after an accidental thumbing. After picking up a 2nd-round DQ victory over CHARLEY WEINERT in Buffalo on June 26, Fulton would be back in the ring with PORKY Dan Flynn on July 5th in Brooklyn, knocking him out in the 4th round. On September 3rd, Fulton would get a long-awaited first victory over arch-rival Carl Morris in Ohio. In the 6th of a scheduled 15 rounds, Morris was disqualified after repeatedly headbutting Fulton. He was down on the cards and looked helpless in the fight, with the referee repeatedly warning him. Around 100 fans stormed the ring in the aftermath, with 2 taking swings at Morris as he was rushed from the ring to safety. On November 27th in Minneapolis, Fred Fulton would step in the ring with another World Heavyweight title hopeful in the battle-tested Ed Gunboat Smith for a 10-round scrap. In what was reported to be a pathetic display on Gunboat Smith's part, Fulton was all over him with hard, sometimes wild swings from the start. In the 4th, Fulton landed a combination that sent Smith into the ropes, which resulted in an iron rod breaking and collapsing the ropes on the side of the ring. After 5 minutes of repair, the fight commenced, with Fulton picking up right where he left off. In the 7th, Smith's corner threw in the sponge to end the fight and save their man from further punishment. Fulton would close out 1917 with a December 10th second-round knockout of Porky Dan Flynn in Columbus, Ohio, before losing to Texas Tate in Little Rock, Arkansas on December 25th. Fulton sent Tate to the canvas with a low left in the first that was ruled a foul. After 10 minutes, the action resumed, and when near the ropes, Fulton jerked himself to the side and tossed Tate through the ropes, nearly knocking him unconscious. Tate's head and back were injured. Though the decision wasn't announced in the immediate aftermath of the fight, the referee disqualified Fulton, handing Tate the first-round DQ victory. Fulton and Texas Tate would rematch on January 10, 1918 in Joplin, Missouri. Fulton bloodied and dropped Tate in the first round of the contest. In the second, a right to the jaw sent Tate to the canvas as he got up and was again dropped. From there, Tate's corner threw in the sponge to save their man. On January 18th, Fulton would step in the ring with fellow Minnesota heavyweight Billy MISKE at the St. Paul Auditorium in front of 8,000 fans. MISKE weighed in at 186 pounds, while Fulton came in at 218. Despite giving up 32 pounds, MISKE showed no respect for Fulton's power and had the crowd on his side, which was the largest since boxing had been legalized in Minnesota. MISKE routinely slipped Fulton's shot and wailed away at his body on the inside. In the end, the bout was ruled a draw as a decision wasn't to be rendered. Fulton received criticism in the aftermath of the fight due to his inability to hurt the smaller MISKE. In a highly anticipated New Orleans clash, Fulton's next contest was against then former heavyweight title challenger Frank Moran on February 25th. Having faced and come up short against Jess Willard in 1916, Moran was considered a barometer for how Fulton would fare against the world heavyweight champion. Fulton opened up a cut on Moran's right eye in the first round. By the end of the second, Moran was bloodied and in distress. A right cross sent Moran to the canvas in the third before his corner threw in the sponge, handing Fulton the emphatic third-round TKO. In the aftermath of the contest, Moran stated that he felt Fulton would outclass Jess Willard if they fought. After knocking out Tom COWLER in the fourth round of their March 11th contest in St. Louis, a world heavyweight title shot seemed to loom. Only one man stood in the way of a Willard-Fulton clash. On January 27, 1918, in Harrison, New Jersey, Fulton stepped in the ring with one of the greatest and arguably the most popular heavyweight in the history of boxing, the Manassas Mauler's Jack Dempsey. The clash was widely covered in print media with massive implications for the winner and loser. Dempsey opened as a favorite in the contest. Within a span of approximately 18 seconds, a left to the stomach followed by a right hook to the jaw sent the Minnesota Plasterer tumbling to the canvas down for the count, having to be dragged back to his corner by his seconds. This would undoubtedly be a setback for Fulton, who left $5,000 with his manager as he sought an immediate rematch with Dempsey. Fulton would bounce back with a November 16 victory over Willie Fatboy Meehan in 4 rounds. Meehan was a rival who gave Jack Dempsey trouble in multiple fights. He'd follow this up with a December 27th victory over the aging Sam Langford in 4 rounds. Fulton would then take a trip across the pond to Great Britain, picking up 4 straight stoppage victories, including a win over P.O. Matthew Curran, a former Commonwealth Boxing Union heavyweight champion, on October 10th. 1920 rolled around and Fulton rematched Frank Moran on January 12th in Newark, New Jersey. Scheduled for 8 rounds, Moran came out blasting as he tried to finish Fulton early to no avail. Fulton rocked Moran in the 7th and had him on groggy legs, though he could not finish him. In the end, Fulton pulled off a points victory over Moran, who was completely gassed by the end of the fight. After again knocking out Tom COWLER in 3 rounds on January 21st, Fulton would then step in with John Lester Johnson on February 3rd. Fulton would dominate Johnson, dropping him twice in the 8th round, with Johnson unable to answer the count on the 2nd knockdown, handing Fulton the knockout victory. Fulton would again knock out Dan Flynn in the 4th round of their February 10th contest before stepping in with Bartley Madden on March 17th, winning a 6-round newspaper decision over his Irish challenger. Fulton would then ice Gunboat Smith in 2 rounds on April 7th. This led to a matchup with one of the greatest heavyweights in boxing history in the Black Panther Harry Wells on July 26th in Newark, New Jersey. This bout was expected to determine who would be the most formidable challenge for Jack Dempsey's world heavyweight title. The 2 men exchanged blows evenly over the first 2 rounds. In the 3rd, it would be 2 right uppercuts that hurt Fulton, with the latter sending him to the canvas and out for the count. This ended Fulton's 19-fight win streak, as well as any hopes of luring Jack Dempsey back into the ring for a rematch. Fulton would get back to his winning ways as he went on a 17-fight unbeaten streak through the first half of 1922, which saw him knock out Carl Morris in 4 rounds on November 22nd, 1921, before drawing with Bartley Madden in their January 13th, 1922 return bout. Fulton also gained 2 wins and a draw in 3 back-to-back fights with the well-traveled Bob Roper between May and July of 1922. From here, Fulton's career would start to take a turn for the worse. On August 25th, 1922, Fulton would again step in the ring with the St. Paul Thunderbolt Billy Miske in St. Paul. Halfway through the first round, Miske floored Fulton, who, though hurt, got up and was floored again with the left that had him down and out for the count, handing Miske the first round knockout victory. Fulton would bounce back with a 5th round TKO over Willie Meehan on September 4th, but would then lose a 15-round points decision to Martin Burke on October 12th. After stopping Carl Morris in the 4th round of the final fight in their rivalry on December 18th, Fulton would then step in the ring with heavyweight contender Floyd Johnson on April 23rd, who dropped Fulton in the 1st before cruising to a 12-round unanimous decision. Fulton took on the formidable Canadian heavyweight contender and former Canadian heavyweight champion Jack Renault in his next bout on May 12th. Fulton would be disqualified in the 4th. Fulton and Renault would have a rematch on October 1st, with Renault knocking Fulton out in the 9th of a scheduled 10-round contest. Fulton started contemplating retirement for a return to his trade as a plasterer in the aftermath of the fight. Nevertheless, Fulton fought on. Fulton and Tiny Jim Herman would exchange knockdowns in the first round of their New Year's Day contest in 1924 before Fulton knocked him out in the 2nd round. After an October 4th 10-round decision loss to Martin Burke, Fulton would be knocked out in the first round of his November 17th matchup with Tony Fuente, one of Jack Dempsey's sparring partners. In his final notable fight on December 18, 1925, Fulton would be dismantled by the underrated Leaperville Shadow George Godfrey, who knocked Fulton out in 5 rounds after dropping him multiple times. Fulton would step away from the ring for 5 years before returning in 1930, drawing before again stepping away and coming back in 1933, losing on points in the final fight of his career. Fulton finished his career with a record of 78 victories, 16 losses, and 2 draws. 70 of his victories were via knockout. He had 11 no decisions and 3 no contests. Given the fact that Fulton started his career in 1913, he was quite green during the reign of Jack Johnson, and though considered a white hope, their paths likely wouldn't have crossed for the title. Despite such, Fulton badly wanted to face then World Heavyweight Champion Jess Willard, who seemingly did everything but fight during his title reign, and therefore Fulton wasn't a priority. Had they fought, Fulton would have in all likelihood become World Heavyweight Champion and one of the biggest names in the sport's history. Additionally, Fulton ran into 2 of the best heavyweights ever in Jack Dempsey and Harry Wells in their prime, hence why he's sometimes overshadowed. As far as punchers rank, there aren't many in history who could dispatch fighters to the degree of Fulton. Still, his lack of elite fundamental skills was something that knowingly held him back as far as beating some of the elite technical boxers of his era. Despite such, if you look at all of the fighters who were mentioned as or deemed to be a white hope, an argument can certainly be made that Fred Fulton was the GOAT. Carry on, my friends.